Ord, Nebraska, June 12, 1893. The U.S. Weather Bureau reported severe early summer windstorms across central Nebraska in the 1890s. Local lore in Sherman County holds that one farm near Ord stood out. Concentric rings of trees supposedly deflected gale-force winds, leaving corn upright, while neighboring fields lodged. The claimed result, approximately 96 bushels per acre versus approximately 33 county average, and a pattern of circular plantings that later spread. This film investigates the claim using verifiable documents, late 19th century windbreak studies and photographs, university experiment station records, and Dust Bowl-era shelterbelt files. Where the legend asserts concentric geometry, the archives overwhelmingly show linear shelterbelts. We'll reconstruct what is documented, test what is not, and quantify the actual measured impacts of tree windbreaks on yield, wind velocity, and soil moisture. Then ask a simple question. If circular belts worked 3 times better, why don't the records show them? Nebraska Prairie, 1886 through 1890. A clerk in the Territorial Weather Office copies a bureau circular onto fresh paper. His pen scratches warnings about wind damage to spring wheat and corn. The circular travels by rail to county seats across the Central Plains. Weather data accumulated at volunteer observation stations shows persistent patterns. Average wind speeds of 15 to 25 miles per hour across the growing season, with storm events exceeding 40 miles per hour occurring 3 to 6 times annually. A farmer receives the notice at the Ord post office. He carries it home through persistent west wind that raises dust devils in bare fields. At his sod house, he tacks the paper to the interior wall with a horseshoe nail. His wife reads it aloud over supper. The words describe lodging, when stalks bend or break under wind stress. Desiccation, when wind strips moisture faster than roots can replace it. Yield loss, the economic consequence, measured in bushels per acre. Outside, their cornfield stands in straight rows, running east to west. No shelter interrupts the wind. The stalks bend eastward throughout the day. Leaves rattle and tear at the edges. Leaf tissue damage reduces photosynthetic capacity by 15 to 30% in exposed fields, according to later agricultural research. In high wind years, stalks lodge before harvest. Ears touch soil. Moisture enters damaged husks. Kernels rot. Mold spreads. Yields fall below 30 bushels per acre when county averages in protected valleys reach 40 to 45 bushels. The circular recommends windbreaks, linear rows of trees planted north and west of fields to intercept prevailing winds. Cottonwood for rapid growth and height. Green ash for durability. Eastern redsheeter for winter density and longevity. Spacing rules appear: dense enough to block wind effectively, porous enough to avoid turbulence and extend protection distance. The concept is not new to 1890. European agricultural tradition includes windbreak hedgerows. Russian steppe farmers plant forest belts. American adaptation begins in the 1870s and accelerates through the 1880s. Photographs from 1897 Cass County show established windbreak rows on Isaac Pollard's farm. 5 rows of mixed species. Total belt width approximately 20 meters. Mature height reaching 12 to 15 meters. Protection extending 150 to 200 meters downwind. State bulletins from the Nebraska Board of Agriculture advise straight, dense plantings to reduce evaporation and lodging. No mention of alternative geometries. No discussion of circular patterns. Period manuals quantify the effect with increasing precision. The 1889 Kansas Agricultural Experiment Station bulletin reports windbreaks reducing wind speed 10 to 30% at distances up to 15 tree heights leeward. Variance depends on height, density, porosity, and belt length. An 1891 Nebraska bulletin confirms similar ranges: 12 to 28% reduction in average wind speed, with maximum effect occurring 3 to 5 tree heights downwind. Protection extends leeward 10 to 20 times tree height, before wind speed returns to ambient levels. Measurements confirm the relationship. Less wind means less water loss through evapotranspiration, less mechanical damage to leaf tissue, less physical lodging of stems. Yields improve in sheltered zones by margins ranging from 8% in low wind years to 35% in severe wind years. The benefit scales with wind intensity. Greater protection value when conditions are harshest. Cause leads to effect through measurable mechanisms. Without shelter, central Nebraska farms lose crops to wind damage, moisture stress, and lodging. With documented shelter, rows, not circles, measurable improvements appear in archival records spanning decades. The circular tacked to that sod house wall represents emerging consensus. Science and systematic observation converge on a single design, linear belts oriented perpendicular to prevailing winds. The recommendation rests on data, not tradition, on measurement, not folklore. By 1890, wind damage ranked among the leading causes of crop loss in parts of central Nebraska, competing with drought, hail, and insect damage. Extension agents and university foresters recommend rows. The official records recommend rows. Early photographs document rows. County Agricultural Society meeting minutes discuss row planting. Nursery catalogs list species for row windbreaks. No contemporary source, in any archive surveyed, mentions concentric rings around crop fields. The absence is significant. Agricultural communication in this era is robust. Farm journals circulate widely. County fairs showcase innovations. Successful techniques spread rapidly through formal and informal networks. A breakthrough delivering triple yields would generate immediate documentation. Newspaper articles, fair premiums, university studies, seed company promotions, neighbor adoption. None of this exists for circular windbreaks. Lincoln and Eastern Nebraska, 1880s through 1890s. University staff sort herbarium sheets in a second-floor office at the University of Nebraska. Forestry notes accumulate on pine shelves built by campus carpenters. A surveyor's chain, 66 feet long, 100 links, the standard for land measurement. Coils on a workbench near the window. Outside, campus elms planted in the 1870s sway in steady wind from the west-northwest. A mechanical anemometer mounted on the building's roof clicks steadily, recording wind data for the state climatology program. The foresters face persistent skepticism from the farming community. Farmers calculate in acres and bushels. Each tree occupies land that could grow corn or wheat. The math appears straightforward. More trees mean less tillable ground, less gross production, less income. Practical men, operating on thin margins, resist allocating land to non-crop uses. Why plant trees when corn pays cash? But data-minded foresters push strategic shelter belts based on accumulating evidence. They measure wind speeds at multiple heights. They calculate evapotranspiration rates using pan-evaporation data. They monitor soil moisture with gravimetric sampling. They weigh crop yields from sheltered versus exposed plots. Numbers accumulate in bound ledgers. Patterns emerge. Height-to-spacing ratios emerge from early trials. Rules of thumb appeared in extension bulletins by the mid-1890s. Plant trees at intervals equal to 1/2 to 3/4 of mature crown width. This spacing balances crown development with belt density. Too close, and trees compete for light and nutrients, producing spindly growth. Too far, and gaps compromise wind protection. Optimal spacing varies by species. Cottonwoods at 4 to 5 meters. Green ash at 3 to 4 meters, cedars at 2 to 3 meters. Later research, particularly through the 1900s and 1910s, standardizes porosity recommendations. Porosity measures the proportion of wind passing through versus around the belt. Solid barriers force airflow upward and over the obstacle, creating turbulent wakes with short protection zones. Porous barriers allow controlled flow-through, bleeding pressure gradually and extending calm air farther downwind. Optimal porosity settles between 30 and 50%. enough gaps to moderate flow, enough density to slow wind significantly. Row number recommendations follow from field trials. Single rows provide minimal protection. 3 rows deliver measurable benefits at reasonable cost. 5 rows offer substantial protection. 7 to 8 rows maximize effectiveness, but consume more land. Extension bulletins typically recommend 3 to 5 rows for field windbreaks, 5 to 8 rows for farmstead protection, where maximum shelter justifies higher land costs. Setback distances optimize the protection footprint. Planting too close to field edges creates shade competition with crops. Planting too far reduces protected area. Guidelines recommend setbacks of 1 to 2 tree heights from crop rows. This distance minimizes shade while maximizing shelter over the growing area. The university becomes a center of measurement culture. Experiment stations translate farmer observations into prescriptive layouts based on controlled trials. Herbarium specimens document species performance under plains conditions, growth rates, cold hardiness, drought tolerance, disease resistance, wind firmness. Surveyors map test plots with chain and compass. Field books fill with wind readings logged 3 times daily. Soil samples accumulate in labeled jars. Yield data fill columnar ledgers. Bulletins travel from Lincoln to county agents via mail and express. Farmers receive printed guidance. Plant medium-height trees 3 to 4 meters apart within rows. Space rows 3 to 4 meters apart. Orient perpendicular to prevailing wind, west-northwest in most of Nebraska. Maintain porosity near 40% through species selection and spacing. Expect shelter extending 10 to 20 times mature height leeward, with maximum effect at 5 to 8 tree heights distance. The archival record demonstrates a systematic method. Testing occurs in measured plots with documented dimensions. Results transfer to extension pamphlets printed by the state government. Photographs document belt establishment, planting year 3, showing sapling growth, year 5 showing young tree structure, year 10 showing mature protection. These images become the foundation of later shelterbelt work, the massive federal programs of the 1930s and 1940s that will plant millions of trees using these refined techniques. Yet, in this mountain of careful documentation, university forestry histories archived at Nebraska State Historical Society, experiment station bulletins preserved in bound volumes, windbreak practice notes filed in extension offices. No contemporary source describes circular field belts. The archives show linear designs exclusively, rows parallel to field edges, rows along property lines, rows protecting farmsteads from specific wind directions, rows in double lines, rows in multiple lines, never concentric rings enclosing crop fields. The absence is telling for researchers examining the historical record. If circular patterns existed and performed well, the measurement culture would have documented them. Foresters sought optimal designs through iterative testing. They tested species combinations. They varied spacing. They compared single rows to multiple rows. They measured at different distances and heights. They published results in bulletins, journals, and reports. Systematic documentation of linear designs fills archives. Silence on circular designs suggests absence in practice, not gaps in record keeping. Sherman County, attributed to 1892 through 1893. Present-day researchers open county ledgers and agricultural society, meeting minutes at the county courthouse and historical society. They search systematically for documentation. Farm names listed in deed records. Land. Transactions recorded in transfer books. Tree nursery orders preserved in merchant ledgers. Planting records in farm diaries. Photographs in family collections. Any evidence suggesting concentric windbreak design on farms near Ord during the claimed period. No Brennan entry appears in any surveyed source. The surname does not appear in county directories from the 1890s. No purchase orders for unusual tree arrangements. No nursery correspondence discussing circular layouts. No photographs depicting target-style tree rings around agricultural fields. No newspaper articles describing the claimed innovation. No county fair entries for windbreak design. No agricultural society discussions of alternative geometries. The claimed innovation, concentric belts delivering triple yields, revolutionary spread of the technique, leaves no paper trail in contemporary Sherman County records or adjacent counties. The contrast between claim and documentation sharpens under scrutiny. Claimed, concentric belts on an identified farm, 96 bushels per acre, when neighbors harvest 33. Superior performance so obvious that others adopt the pattern. Documented, linear belts across hundreds of farms yield improvements of 10 to 35% depending on conditions. Universal adoption of orthodox row designs by universities, government agencies, and commercial nurseries. The gap between these narratives demands systematic investigation. To test the legend against documented reality, we must define testable metrics using methods available in the historical period. Wind velocity at crop height, measured with cup anemometers, typically Robinson 3-cup designs, mounted at 1 to 2 meters elevation, corresponding to mature corn or wheat height. Such instruments became standard at agricultural experiment stations in the 1880s and proliferated through the 1890s. Protected distance leeward, measured by establishing instrument stations at intervals downwind from belts, typically at 5, 10, 15, and 20 tree heights distance. Soil moisture retention, assessed through gravimetric sampling, where soil cores of known volume are weighed fresh, oven-dried at controlled temperature, and weighed again to determine water content by weight. Yield comparisons, measured in bushels per acre from multiple locations over multiple years, with care taken to account for soil type, slope, seed variety, and cultivation practices. Lodging percentages, assessed by counting stems in measured quadrats, categorizing as upright, leaning, or fully lodged at harvest time. These metrics exist in late 19th century agricultural research. Period manuals describe measurement protocols in detail. The U.S. Department of Agriculture publishes standardized methods. Land-grant universities establish experiment stations specifically to conduct such trials under consistent protocols. By the 1930s, the Prairie States Forestry Project consolidated decades of shelterbelt science into comprehensive technical documents based on thousands of measurements from hundreds of sites. The method for evaluating the circular claim emerges clearly. Test assertions against known physics and documented practice. Wind flow over and around obstacles follows fluid dynamics principles well understood by the 1890s. Drag forces, porosity effects, turbulent wakes, boundary layer development, all governed by measurable relationships. Tree belts modify wind fields predictably. Dense belts create turbulent wakes with short protection due to flow separation. Porous belts allow controlled flow through with extended calm zones. Edge effects at belt ends reduce effectiveness due to lateral flow around obstacles. Belt length must exceed height by factors of 20 to 30 to minimize end effects. Circular belts introduce aerodynamic complications not present in linear designs. The Great Plains climate exhibits strong directional wind. West to northwest prevails across seasons. A circular belt presents varying geometries to this directional flow. The windward curve presents an oblique face, potentially reducing effective porosity and creating complex wake patterns. Trees on the windward side shelter trees on the leeward side within the ring structure, creating internal wind gradients. But on the far leeward field side, protection characteristics should theoretically resemble a standard linear belt of similar height and porosity. On windward and lateral sides, effectiveness would differ substantially from optimal linear placement. Net result, complex flow patterns, likely suboptimal compared to a well-designed linear belt occupying dramatically less land area. If circular patterns were genuinely superior for crop protection and yield enhancement, multiple adoption signals should appear in the historical record. Nursery catalogs would list circular layout packages with recommended spacing for various farm sizes. University bulletins would diagram concentric designs with species recommendations for each ring. Extension agents would promote the technique through demonstrations and field days. Photographs would document the distinctive pattern. Farm implement manufacturers would develop specialized equipment for ring cultivation, curved planters, adapted cultivators, circular harvesters. Federal programs in the 1930s would incorporate proven circular designs into Depression-era conservation efforts. We can search for these adoption signals systematically across archives. The search yields consistent results. Documentation of linear windbreaks is abundant and detailed. Documentation of circular windbreaks is absent. The pattern holds across state archives, university special collections, federal records, and private manuscript collections. Great Plains Farm Press and Agricultural Bulletins, 1890 through 1915. An extension agent in a county office flips through stacked farm papers accumulating on his desk. The Prairie Farmer, Dakota Farmer, Nebraska Farmer, Kansas Farmer. Regional publications, serving agricultural communities. Columns advise windbreak placement with practical specificity, rows on north and west sides of fields and farmsteads. Never east or south. Those directions receive less frequent and less damaging wind in plains climate. The advice repeats across publications, across years, across states. Consensus emerges from accumulated experience. Agricultural orthodoxy develops through repeated testing and farmer adoption. Straight shelterbelts receive promotion for multiple practical reasons: ease of cultivation using standard equipment, known protective effect backed by measurements, compatibility with rectangular field geometry, straightforward land surveying and property lines. Farmers can plow to the belt edge without complicated maneuvering. Headlands for equipment turning remain simple and efficient. Machinery, planters, cultivators, mowers, binders, and early tractors operates in rectangular patterns with minimal waste motion. Cost and labor calculations favor linear designs overwhelmingly. Spacing standards solidified through the 1890s and consolidated by 1910. Medium-height deciduous trees, green ash, hackberry, elm, at 3 to 4 meters within rows, providing crown development space while maintaining belt density. Tall trees, cottonwood, silver maple, at 4 to 5 meters, accounting for larger mature crown spread. Shrubs for understory or outer rows, wild plum, chokecherry, buffaloberry, at 1.5 to 4 meters, depending on species and purpose. Row number varies by application and budget. 3 to 5 rows for field windbreaks, where land cost matters. 5 to 8 rows for farmstead protection, where maximum shelter justifies higher investment. Up to 10 rows for large livestock operations, requiring severe wind protection. More rows increase wind reduction, but consume proportionally more land. Extension publications provide cost-benefit calculations. A 3-row belt on a quarter-section perimeter occupies approximately 8 acres, 5% of total area. A 5-row belt occupies approximately 12 acres, 7.5%. An 8-row belt approaches 18 acres, over 11%. Farmers balance protection benefits against land costs. Most choose 3 to 5 rows for field applications, allocating more rows only where conditions demand maximum protection. Porosity targets settle near 40%, based on emerging understanding of wind flow physics. Early bulletins recommend medium density, intuitive but imprecise. By 1910, foresters expressed porosity quantitatively as the percentage of belt cross-section allowing wind passage. Too dense, below 25% porosity, creates solid barriers that force flow upward, generating turbulent wakes with short protection distance. Too porous, above 60%, fails to slow wind sufficiently. An optimum range of 35 to 45% balances wind reduction with protection distance. Protection footprint extends typically 10 to 20 times mature height on the leeward side under prevailing wind direction. A belt reaching 15 meters tall protects crops 150 to 300 meters downwind, depending on porosity, wind speed, and atmospheric stability. Farmers plan field layouts accordingly, positioning belts to maximize protected area while minimizing land consumption. Benefits include reduced evapotranspiration, water loss from soil and plants, by 15 to 35% in sheltered zones. Less mechanical lodging of crops. Stalks remain upright rather than bending or breaking. Improved pollinator habitat. Bees and beneficial insects find shelter and nesting sites in belt understory. Snow catchment. Drifts accumulate in organized patterns, storing winter precipitation for spring release. Microclimate moderation. Temperature extremes dampen near belts, reducing frost damage in spring and heat stress in summer. Concentric belts remain conspicuously absent from extension recommendations throughout this 25-year period. The agricultural press, widely distributed, commercially motivated to share innovations that increase subscriber value, never promotes circular designs. If such patterns delivered superior results, editors would publicize them aggressively. Seed companies and nurseries would market circular layout packages. Implement manufacturers would develop adapted equipment and advertise compatibility. Success stories would spread through farmer testimonials and county fair displays. None of this documentation exists in surveyed archives. The reason becomes apparent through economic analysis. A perimeter windbreak on a standard quarter section, 160 acres, approximately 800 meters per side, occupies 2 to 4 acres for a 3-row belt at optimal spacing. This represents 1.25 to 2.5% of total land area. The protected interior exceeds 155 acres. Compared to hypothetical concentric rings, 3 rings at radii of 150, 250, and 350 meters, each 15 meters wide, would occupy approximately 96 acres, 60% of the quarter section. The cultivable interior shrinks to approximately 18 acres. Net crop area drops from 155 acres to 18 acres, an 88% reduction. To break even on yield per quarter section, per acre productivity in the 18-acre interior would need to exceed perimeter protected productivity by more than 8 times, far beyond any documented windbreak benefit. Land loss to circular bands would exceed perimeter belts by factors of 20 or more for equivalent protection, delivering uncertain gain while creating severe operational penalties. Machinery cannot easily navigate concentric patterns. Planting, cultivating, spraying, and harvesting equipment designed for rectangular fields cannot efficiently work circular bands. Cross-ring travel requires gaps, which compromise wind protection. Closing gaps eliminates cross-ring access, forcing equipment to enter and exit through single points, massive time waste on every field operation. Labor hours per acre multiply. Fuel consumption escalates. Equipment wear accelerates from constant turning. Orthodoxy emerges and dominates because it scales effectively, costs less in land and labor, shows repeatable benefits in documented trials and photographs, and integrates seamlessly with existing agricultural infrastructure. The practical mathematics and operational logistics favor rows overwhelmingly. Nobody in the agricultural establishment, universities, government agencies, commercial suppliers, farmer organizations, documents circular alternatives because such designs make no economic sense. Nebraska, 1897, Cass County. An archivist in the Nebraska State Historical Society labels album prints in a climate-controlled archive room. 2 windbreak photographs, taken the same week in late August. Both show established tree rows on Isaac Pollard's farm near Louisville. 5 rows of mixed species. Cottonwoods in back rows for height. Green ash in middle rows for density and durability. Wild plum in outer rows for wildlife value and early spring bloom. Total belt width approximately 20 meters. Mature height reaching 12 to 15 meters in back rows. Protection extends visibly 150 to 200 meters downwind, where corn stands noticeably taller and darker green than in exposed areas beyond protection range. Photographic evidence confirms textual guidance from bulletins and extension publications. The 1897 images are not unique or exceptional specimens. State historical collections hold dozens of similar photographs from the 1890s through 1920s documenting windbreak adoption across Nebraska. Farm after farm shows linear windbreaks. Some protect homesteads from winter wind. Others shelter field edges from prevailing summer wind. A few run along property boundaries, serving dual purposes of wind protection and property demarcation. All share the same fundamental geometry: straight rows perpendicular to prevailing wind direction. No curves, no circles, no concentric rings. Straight lines captured in silver gelatin emulsion on glass plates and cellulose film. Photo-documented dimensions allow retrospective analysis using modern wind flow models. Tree spacing within rows, row spacing, belt width, estimated height, estimated porosity based on visible crown density, all measurable in period photographs. Researchers can input these parameters into computational fluid dynamics software, model expected wind fields, and validate against field measurements recorded in contemporary bulletins. The models confirm period observations, linear belts of documented dimensions, deliver wind reductions matching reported ranges of 20 to 50% at crop height. Measured snow deposition patterns appear in winter photographs from multiple locations. Drifts accumulate on the leeward side of windbreaks, creating organized snow storage. Clean swept zones extend 3 to 5 tree heights downwind, where wind acceleration over the belt prevents deposition. Beyond this zone, snow catch increases, creating drifts that may reach 1 to 2 meters deep. These drifts store winter precipitation, releasing moisture during spring melt and recharging soil profiles before planting season. Field notes from the period describe lodging rates in harvest reports. Sheltered swaths show 90 to 95% of corn stalks standing upright at harvest, while exposed areas beyond protection range show only 60 to 75% upright in high wind years. The pattern is consistent across photographic archives. Farmers plant rows. University researchers photograph rows for documentation and publication. Extension agents use row photographs in educational materials. Bulletin illustrations diagram row spacing and setbacks. Equipment catalogs show implements working near row windbreaks. The entire agricultural system, production, research, education, commerce, converges on linear design. Visual documentation reinforces textual documentation. Orthodoxy is rows, rows work, rows scale. If a geometry orchard, concentric rings forming target patterns visible from above, existed near Ord in the 1892 through 1893 period. As legend claims, it should appear in photographic surveys conducted through subsequent decades. State forestry agencies documented windbreak adoption rates to track program success and justify continued funding. Universities collected images for research publications and extension teaching materials. Farm papers published success stories with accompanying photographs to inspire subscriber adoption. Aerial photography begins in the 1920s and accelerates through the 1930s, capturing legacy plantings from earlier decades. The 1930s Agricultural Adjustment Administration conducted systematic aerial surveys of Great Plains farmland to document wind erosion and conservation practices. None of these extensive image collections, examined in archives at Nebraska State Historical Society, University of Nebraska Libraries, National Archives and Records Administration, State Forestry Agency files, depict circular windbreak belts around crop fields in Nebraska during relevant time periods. The absence spans multiple independent sources, multiple decades of documentation, multiple states across the Great Plains. Researchers searching archives systematically find rows, only rows, thousands of images of row windbreaks, 0 images of concentric circular windbreaks. Photographs serve as contemporary primary source evidence created during the period in question. unlike later folklore transmitted through generations or oral traditions colored by selective memory and embellishment. Photographs cannot lie about basic geometry. The camera records what existed in the camera's field of view at the moment of exposure. Across Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas, the Dakotas, wherever windbreak photography occurred in the 1890s through 1930s, the photographic record proves identical. Linear belts dominate the documented landscape, straight rows protecting rectangular fields, standard agricultural geometry. The claimed circular innovation leaves no visual trace in a system that extensively documented agricultural practices through photography. State agencies, universities, federal programs, commercial publishers, and individual farmers all created photographic records. In an era when agricultural innovation spread rapidly through visual documentation, county fair displays, bulletin illustrations, magazine features, demonstration farm tours, silence in the photographic record weighs heavily. If the circular design existed and delivered claimed benefits, someone would have photographed it. Many people would have photographed it. The innovation would have generated visual documentation proportional to its claimed superiority. The photographs that do exist, abundant, detailed, consistent, document orthodox linear practice. They prove the historical reality of what farmers actually built and what researchers actually measured. They provide visual evidence supporting the documentary record found in bulletins, reports, and publications. Together, textual and visual archives tell the same story. Linear windbreaks dominated Great Plains agriculture because linear windbreaks worked reliably at acceptable cost. Synthesis of measured effects, 1890s foundations through modern summaries. A technician at a field research station reads a cup anemometer at 90 a.m. Robinson 3-cup type, mounted 1.5 meters above ground. Crop height for mature corn in July. The cups spin in the west wind at 18 miles per hour. A mechanical counterlogs rotations over a 10-minute interval. The technician converts total counts to average wind speed using the instrument's calibration factor, meters per second, then converted to miles per hour for report purposes. The value enters a field notebook in a ruled column, 9 Xiaos AM 18.2 METMH, ambient west-northwest. A second anemometer, 150 meters leeward of a windbreak, reads 9.6 miles per hour at the same time, 47% reduction. Both values are recorded. Similar measurements accumulate at noon and 3 Haus Kreis p.m. Daily means calculated, weekly summaries compiled, monthly reports submitted. Similar measurements accumulate across decades and locations. University experiment stations in Nebraska, Kansas, Iowa, the Dakotas. USDA research facilities. Later, Prairie States Forestry Project monitoring sites were established across 6 states. Data converges on consistent relationships between windbreak design parameters and wind reduction outcomes. Height matters. Taller belts, project protection farther downwind. Porosity matters. 40% optimal for maximum protection distance. Species matters. Dense evergreens provide year-round protection but risk overdensity. Deciduous trees provide summer protection with winter permeability. Length matters. Belts must exceed height by 20 to 30 times to minimize end effects from lateral flow. Linear shelter belts with optimal design parameters reduce wind speed 20 to 50% at crop height, depending on distance downwind, belt height, belt density, and ambient wind speed. Maximum reduction, approaching 60%, occurs 3 to 5 tree heights leeward. Protection distance scales with tree height, according to well-documented relationships. Useful wind reduction extends 10 to 15 tree heights downwind. Measurable reduction extends 15 to 20 tree heights. Full ambient wind speed returns beyond 20 tree heights. A 10-meter belt protects crops 100 to 200 meters leeward under most conditions. Beyond 200 meters, wind speed recovers to near ambient levels, and yield benefits disappear. Overdense belts create aerodynamic problems recognized early in windbreak research. Solid barriers, porosity below 25%, force wind upward and over the obstacle. Airflow separates from ground level, creating a brief calm zone immediately leeward, followed by turbulent reattachment, where chaotic eddies create damaging gusts. Net protected distance shrinks to 5 to 8 tree heights. Total protected area drops by half compared to optimal porosity. Early bulletins warn against overplanting or using exclusively dense species. Optimal designs maintain 30 to 50% porosity through species selection and spacing. Mixed plantings achieve target porosity naturally, dense species in some rows, open crown species in others. The belt architecture allows controlled flow-through, bleeding wind pressure gradually. Airflow remains attached to ground level through and beyond the belt. Velocity reduction extends smoothly downwind without turbulent reattachment zones. Protected area maximizes. Yield effects vary by crop, climate, and year-to-year weather. Many controlled studies from the 1890s through 1940s report 10 to 25% yield gains in sheltered zones compared to open fields. Meta-analyses aggregating results from dozens of trials show median improvement near 18% for corn under Great Plains conditions. Benefits increase markedly in stress years: high wind, drought, extreme heat. In severe conditions, sheltered crops may yield 30 to 40% more than exposed crops. Some individual site years show 50% improvements when disaster strikes exposed fields, while sheltered fields maintain productivity. But baseline improvements across average years remain modest, double-digit percentages, not multiples. Typical improvement transforms a 35-bushel field to 41 bushels, meaningful economically, not miraculous. The measurable relationships explain why rows oriented perpendicular to prevailing wind became universal standard practice. Wind climatology across the Great Plains shows clear directionality. West to northwest prevails across the growing season. Damaging winds, those exceeding 25 miles per hour and creating lodging risk, come predominantly from west-northwest. Optimal protection requires intercepting these specific winds. Plant rows northwest to southeast across Nebraska. Adjust orientation slightly north or south, depending on local topography and microclimate. Extension bulletins provide county-specific recommendations based on regional wind data. Circular rings introduce aerodynamic asymmetry not present in linear designs. The windward curve presents an oblique face to directional flow, reducing effective frontal area and potentially creating complex wake structures. Wind approaching at oblique angles to curved surfaces generates lateral pressure gradients, inducing flow acceleration along the curve, potentially increasing rather than decreasing wind speed in some zones. Trees on the windward side shelter trees on the leeward side within the ring, creating internal wind gradients and complicating protection predictions. On the far leeward field side, the critical zone for crop protection, a concentric ring should theoretically provide shelter similar to a straight belt of equivalent height and porosity. But this theoretical equivalence applies only directly downwind of the ring center. Lateral zones receive asymmetric protection. Windward zones receive minimal protection, potentially experiencing accelerated flow as wind deflects around the convex exterior. Net effect across the entire field becomes difficult to predict without detailed wind tunnel testing or computational modeling, neither available in the 1890s. Physics documented through thousands of measurements supports rows. Fluid dynamics principles support rows. Decades of cup anemometer data logged in field notebooks support rows. Circular rings would sacrifice substantial tillable area, complicate field operations dramatically, and deliver uncertain aerodynamic advantage compared to optimized linear design occupying far less land. No documented measurements from any archive support the 3 times yield claim for circular windbreaks. Plains research stations, early trials through modern syntheses, soil sampling cans, Cylindrical metal tins with tight-fitting lids, labeled by depth and location, air dry in a convection oven set to 105 degrees Celsius. Samples collected at 15, 30, 45, and 60 centimeters below surface using a soil auger with volumetric cutting head. 4 depths capture moisture gradients through the root zone. 8 sampling points per field. 4 in sheltered zones within 10 tree heights of windbreak. 4 in exposed zones beyond 20 tree heights. Samples collected monthly during the growing season, from May through September. Technicians weigh cans on precision balances before and after drying. Gravimetric moisture content calculated. Weight of water divided by weight of dry soil, expressed as percentage. May sample from sheltered zone, 22.4%. May sample from exposed zone, 18.1%. 4 percentage points difference, 22% higher moisture in sheltered zone. Repeated sampling across growing seasons reveals consistent patterns. Open fields lose water faster through combined evaporation from soil surface and transpiration from plant leaves. Wind strips away moisture-saturated boundary layers that naturally form around leaves in calm conditions. Removal of these boundary layers steepens the vapor pressure gradient between leaf interior and atmosphere, accelerating water loss. Plants must replace lost water through root uptake or close stomata to prevent desiccation. Stomatal closure reduces photosynthesis. Growth slows. Yield declines. Surface soil dries most rapidly under wind exposure. The top 15 centimeters, critical for seedling establishment and early root development, shows most dramatic moisture differences between sheltered and exposed zones. July measurements during drought period. Sheltered zone maintains 16.2% moisture at 15 centimeters depth. Exposed zone drops to 11.8%, 27% lower. Below 30 centimeters depth, differences narrow as deeper soil remains buffered from surface conditions. But crops depend heavily on surface moisture during critical growth stages: emergence, vegetative development, pollination. Evapotranspiration rates scale directly with wind speed. Research quantifies the relationship. Evapotranspiration increases approximately 5 to 8% for each 1 meter per second increase in wind speed at crop height, all other factors equal. Reducing wind from 6 meters per second to 3 meters per second. A 50% reduction achievable with optimal windbreak design. Cuts evapotranspiration by 15 to 25%. Over a growing season, this moisture savings accumulates significantly, equivalent to 2 to 4 inches of additional rainfall in semi-arid Great Plains climate. Sheltered fields retain moisture longer through the growing season. Measurements typically show 10 to 25% higher soil moisture near windbreaks compared to open fields during dry periods. The effect is strongest within 5 to 10 tree heights leeward, the primary protection zone. Beyond 15 tree heights, differences narrow. Beyond 20 tree heights, moisture levels converge with unprotected conditions. The spatial pattern of moisture retention matches the spatial pattern of wind reduction, confirming the causal mechanism. Moisture conservation translates directly to yield through well-understood plant physiology. Plants experiencing less water stress maintain higher photosynthetic rates. Root development improves. More extensive root systems access water and nutrients more effectively. Flowering and grain fill proceed under favorable water status. Critical because water stress during reproductive stages devastates yields. The mechanisms are measurable and repeatable across locations and years. Additional benefits compound beyond moisture conservation. Wind abrasion damages leaves through sand blasting effects. Airborne soil particles tear leaf cuticles and mesophyll tissue. Damaged tissue reduces photosynthetic capacity by 15 to 30% in severely exposed fields. Sheltered crops maintain intact leaf area longer into the growing season, sustaining productivity through grain fill. Lodging decreases dramatically in sheltered zones. Upright plants harvest more efficiently with less field loss. pollinator and beneficial insect populations improve in sheltered microclimates, potentially enhancing pollination and biological pest control. Wildlife habitat value increases, providing ecosystem services beyond crop production. University and USFS bulletins consolidate decades of windbreak agronomy into comprehensive technical references. Meta-analyses synthesize hundreds of individual trials conducted across varying soils, climates, and management systems. Yield uplift gradients appear consistently in published charts and tables. Maximum benefit closest to windbreak within 5 tree heights, declining linearly with distance, reaching 0 beyond 20 tree heights. The spatial pattern of crop response maps directly onto the spatial pattern of wind modification. Documented gains are meaningful to farm economics and family survival. 10 to 25% yield improvement justifies windbreak investment when calculated over typical tree lifespan of 40 to 60 years. Trees require 5 to 10 years to reach effective protection height, but once established, benefits persist for decades with minimal maintenance. Annual costs include occasional pruning, replacing dead trees, perhaps 2 to 5% of trees lost per decade, and protecting from livestock damage. Annual benefits include consistent yield improvements, reduced crop insurance losses in stress years, enhanced property value, and diversified income from potential timber or firewood harvest. Return on investment calculations from extension publications typically show positive returns within 15 to 20 years after establishment, assuming moderate yield improvements of 15% and accounting for land occupied by trees. In stress years when exposed fields fail or produce minimal yields while sheltered fields maintain production, single-year returns can exceed cumulative costs, validating the investment immediately. Risk reduction value, avoiding complete crop failure, justifies windbreak establishment even without average year yield gains. But documented gains are not miracles, not 3 times baseline yield, not revolutionary transformations of agricultural productivity. Incremental, measurable, economically significant, but bounded by plant physiology, climate constraints, and physical limits of wind modification. A farm averaging 33 bushels per acre in exposed conditions might realistically achieve 38 to 43 bushels per acre in sheltered zones with well-designed windbreaks and favorable growing conditions. Impressive, replicable, worth doing. Not 96 bushels per acre from wind protection alone. That level of yield requires exceptional soil, optimal rainfall, improved genetics, intensive management, and favorable weather beyond what windbreaks can provide. The archives describe real benefits achieved through sound design, properly executed. The legend describes extraordinary claims without supporting documentation, measurement, or replication. The gap between documented reality and folklore matters to understanding agricultural history accurately. 1902 through 1942, Plains States. A federal map drafts an ambitious plan. A continuous 100-mile-wide belt of tree plantings, from Canadian border to Texas Panhandle. The Great Plains Shelterbelt, later renamed Prairie States Forestry Project, emerges from Dust Bowl desperation and New Deal policy innovation. President Franklin Roosevelt personally champions the program. Crews load bare rootstock at centralized nurseries, eastern reed cedar, Rocky Mountain juniper, green ash, American elm, cottonwood, hackberry, Osage orange. Trucks and rail cars move millions of seedlings to planting sites across 6 states. Young men from civilian Conservation Corps camps dig holes, set seedlings, tamp soil, water, and move to the next position. Row after row. Day after day, month after month. The program represents the largest organized tree planting effort in American history measured by area, investment, and coordination. By 1942, when wartime priorities redirect resources, approximately 220 million trees stand in more than 30,000 individual shelterbelt plantings across North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. Total area directly influenced approaches 18,600 square miles, larger than Massachusetts and Connecticut combined. Indirect benefits extend far beyond planted areas, as regional wind patterns, moderate and dust storm frequency decreases. Design standards emphasize linear arrays exclusively. Field windbreaks follow property lines and field edges, protecting crops from prevailing winds. Farmstead shelterbelts protect buildings, gardens, and livestock facilities from winter cold and summer heat. Living snow fences line highways, controlling drifts and maintaining road accessibility. Contour belts on sloping land reduce erosion and retain runoff. Every standard design uses rows. Federal foresters specify spacing by species and purpose. Species mixes vary by latitude and soil type. Northern plains favor hardy conifers and cold-tolerant deciduous trees. Southern plains use drought-resistant species. Row numbers range from 3 for minimal field protection to 12 for intensive farmstead shelter. Farmers sign voluntary planting agreements committing to maintain trees and protect from livestock. CCC crews execute plans under forester supervision. The program draws on accumulated knowledge from 3 decades of land grant research. University studies from the 1890s through 1920s identify successful species, quantify protection distances, optimize spacing and porosity. State forestry agencies accumulate practical experience establishing windbreaks under varying conditions. Great Plains experiment stations conduct trials, measuring wind reduction, moisture conservation, and yield effects. By the 1930s, this distributed research consolidated into evidence-based standards, ready for large-scale implementation. Federal planners study existing windbreaks extensively before finalizing program designs. Photographic surveys document successful plantings. Field measurements quantify performance. Farmer interviews identify practical challenges, livestock damage, maintenance requirements, interaction with farm equipment. University experts consult on species selection and climate matching. Climate data from Weather Bureau stations inform regional adaptations. Soil surveys guide species choices for specific soil types. Sandy soils receive deep-rooted species. Clay soils receive shallow-rooted species. Saline soils receive salt-tolerant species. If Brennan-style circles, concentric rings delivering triple yields, existed and outperformed linear belts, this massive federal program would have discovered and adopted them. The stakes were national survival. Dust bowl migration threatened social stability. Agricultural collapse devastated rural economies. Political pressure demanded visible results. Program administrators sought maximum effectiveness from every dollar invested. They studied optimal designs systematically. They consulted the best agricultural scientists available. They analyzed wind and climate data extensively. They are designed for measurable outcomes: reduced erosion rates, improved moisture retention, enhanced yields, protected infrastructure, regional microclimate improvement. The program chose rows exclusively and deliberately, not because planners lacked imagination or failed to consider alternatives, because rows worked reliably, scaled to mechanized agriculture efficiently, integrated with existing farm operations smoothly, and delivered documented benefits at acceptable cost per acre. Because 3 decades of measurement and testing across hundreds of experiment station trials all pointed to linear designs as optimal. Because photographs of successful windbreaks uniformly showed rows. Because economic analysis demonstrated rows maximize protected cropland while minimizing land consumption. Archival histories from multiple sources document the program comprehensively. USFS administrative records at the National Archives preserve planning documents, planting contracts, progress reports, and photographic documentation. Nebraska History Journal publishes contemporary accounts and retrospective analyses. The Oklahoma Historical Society maintains state program files. Kansas State Historical Society archives correspondence and field reports. Federal pamphlets distributed to potential participants explain program goals, design standards, and maintenance requirements. Photo albums compiled during planting years show CCC crews working in straight lines across prairie landscapes. Images from 1935 through 1942 consistently depict linear belt establishment. Crews plant in measured rows. Spacing stakes mark positions at 3-meter intervals. Bare root seedlings arrive, bundled and heal in temporary trenches. Foremen mark belt boundaries with survey flags. Progress reports tabulate row miles planted by county and month. Success metrics measure linear foot survival rates, height growth by species and age, belt continuity, percentage of linear distance achieving target density. Nowhere in this extensive documentation do circular patterns appear. Nowhere do program reports mention concentric designs, target geometries, or radial planting patterns. The entire program, from planning through execution through measurement, operates within linear geometry exclusively. When the nation invested massively in windbreak technology, when agricultural survival and rural society stability demanded measurable results, America planted rows. 220 million trees in rows. 30,000 belts in rows. 6 states. Tens of millions of acres influenced. Billions of dollars invested in current terms, all based on linear design. The shelterbelt legacy is one of documentation, systematic replication, rigorous measurement, and verified success at continental scale, not folklore. Not unverified anecdotes, not claims without documentation. Proven practice, at massive scale, under intense scrutiny. If circular windbreaks delivered superior performance, if concentric rings truly tripled yields compared to linear belts, the Depression-era federal government would have discovered this during extensive research. The program would have tested circular designs in pilot plantings. Positive results would have triggered rapid adoption across the program. By 1942, tens of thousands of circular belts would exist across 6 states. Aerial photographs would show distinctive target patterns. Contemporary reports would celebrate the superior design. Later, historical accounts would reference the innovative geometry that maximized program effectiveness. None of this documentation exists. The program planted rows, measured row performance, and achieved program goals using rows. When America needed windbreaks to work reliably at continental scale, America chose the design supported by evidence. Linear shelter belts, perpendicular to prevailing winds. Analytical reconstruction using Great Plains parameters. A drafting table in a modern university extension office displays transparent overlay sheets. The base layer shows a standard 160-acre quarter section, 800 meters by 800 meters, typical Nebraska farm parcels under Homestead Act survey system. The scale marked at 1 centimeter equals 40 meters. North arrow indicates prevailing wind direction, west-northwest at 295 degrees. Soil type noted Holdreja silt loam, productive class 2 agricultural land. Next overlay, hypothetical 3-ring concentric windbreak design for comparison to documented linear practice. Innermost ring, radius 150 meters measured from field center. Belt width 15 meters, enclosing approximately 18 acres of interior cropland. Middle ring, radius 250 meters, belt width 15 meters. Band area approximately 31 acres between inner and middle rings. Outer ring, radius 350 meters, belt width 15 meters. Band area, approximately 47 acres between middle and outer rings. 3 belts totaling 45 meters width occupy approximately 96 acres, 60% of the quarter section. Remaining cultivable area, 64 acres divided into 3 concentric bands plus 18-acre central circle. Total land in trees, 96 acres. Total land in crops, 64 acres, compared to standard perimeter belts documented in thousands of period photographs. Same 15-meter width around quarter section perimeter. 4 straight belts, totaling 3,200 linear meters, approximately 12 acres, 7.5% of total area. Remaining cultivable interior, 148 acres in single continuous block. Land ratio, concentric design preserves 43% of land for crops. Perimeter design preserves 92.5%. To achieve equal gross production per quarter section, the concentric design must generate 2.16 times per acre yield of perimeter design, before accounting for any windbreak benefits. No documented windbreak benefits approach this magnitude. Expected wind fields introduce additional complications beyond land consumption. Prevailing west-northwest wind at 6 meters per second, ambient, encounters the outer ring first. Trees create drag, extracting momentum from airflow. Wind speed reduces 30 to 40% immediately leeward of the outer belt, down to 3.6 to 4.2 meters per second. This reduced wind then encounters the middle ring. Already slowed wind experiences further reduction, but percentage reduction decreases because wind modification scales with ambient velocity. Wind reaching the inner ring has been slowed twice already. Velocity perhaps 2.5 to 3.5 meters per second. Inner belt modifies already modified wind. Net result, layered protection, but diminishing returns from successive rings. The outer ring provides most protection, the middle ring adds marginal benefit. The inner ring adds minimal additional benefit, because wind is already substantially slowed. Meanwhile, the cultivation penalty grows with each ring added. Internal recirculation zones complicate predictions. Wind passing over and around circular obstacles creates complex three-dimensional flow structures. Turbulent wakes form leeward of windward-facing sections. Lateral sections shed vortices that may increase local wind speeds through acceleration around convex curves. The central area within the innermost ring may experience variable protection depending on wind direction variability and turbulent mixing. Without wind tunnel testing or computational fluid dynamics modeling, tools unavailable in the 1890s, performance predictions remain uncertain. Cultivation penalties multiply with concentric design. How does machinery plant 3 concentric crop bands separated by tree belts? Standard equipment, planters, cultivators, sprayers, combines, operates in straight or gently curved paths. Tight radius curves damage equipment and crops. Access roads between rings occupy additional land. Gaps through belts for equipment passage compromise wind. Protection. Gaps become preferential flow paths where wind accelerates through constrictions. Close gaps, and equipment must enter and exit each ring through single access points, massive time waste on every field operation. A planter covering 148 acres in a rectangular field requires perhaps 2 hours actual planting plus 30 minutes headland turns. The same planter covering 64 acres divided into 4 concentric rings might require 4 hours, due to constant turning, limited run lengths, and access inefficiencies, doubling labor and fuel per acre planted. Headlands for equipment turning multiply geometrically. Rectangular field, 4 headland zones at field perimeter. 3-ring system, 8 headland zones, outer perimeter, both sides of outer belt, both sides of middle belt, both sides of inner belt, plus interior circle edge. Each headland occupies 6 to 8 meters width, land that produces reduced yields due to compaction and turn damage. Total headland area increases from approximately 5 acres in rectangular design to perhaps 12 acres in concentric design, another 7 acres lost to operational penalties. Use verified windbreak design equations documented in university bulletins. Wind reduction scales with belt height and porosity, not repetition in concentric patterns. Protection distance is physically limited to 10 to 20 tree heights, regardless of how many belts exist upwind. A 15-meter belt protects 150 to 300 meters downwind. The protected footprint is fixed by fluid dynamics. Adding more belts inward does not extend this protection distance outward. Total protected area shrinks with increasing ring count, as interior cultivable space decreases, while protection distance per belt remains constant. Economic analysis confirms the verdict. Land value in 1890s Nebraska, $5 to $15 per acre, depending on improvements and location. Annual gross income from corn, $8 to $12 per acre at 0.25 per bushel and 32 to 48 bushels per acre. Perimeter belt occupies 12 acres. Foregone income, $96 to $144 annually. Protected interior of 148 acres, generating baseline 32 bushels per acre, yields 4,636 bushels gross. With documented 20% windbreak improvement, sheltered yield reaches 38 bushels per acre. 5,624 bushels total, 888 bushels gain. At 0.25 per bushel, 222 is our annual benefit. Net benefit, $222 minus $120 average land opportunity cost equals $102 annual return. Positive economics justifying investment. Concentric design occupies 96 acres. Foregone income, $768 to $1,150 annually. Protected interior of 64 acres at 32 bushels baseline yields 2,048 bushels. Even with optimistic 40% improvement, sheltered yield reaches 45 bushels per acre, 2,880 bushels total, 832 bushels gain. At 0.25 per bushel, 208 annual benefit. Net result, 208 benefit minus $960 average opportunity cost equals negative $752 annually. Economic disaster. The concentric design destroys value, even assuming generous yield improvements. Concentric belts may create mixed shelter across field areas, but they impose catastrophic area penalties, massive operational burden, and questionable aerodynamic advantage compared to linear design. The mathematics deliver an unambiguous verdict. Net yield per quarter section declines dramatically, not triples, under concentric design. More land in trees, less land in crops, higher labor costs per acre, uncertain protection benefits. No economically rational farmer would adopt this design after calculating basic returns. The claimed 3 times yield outcome violates economic and physical reality simultaneously.